Hey, so this video, it's probably not for most of my subscribers, but I hope it's for someone. Star Wars makes no sense and is a bit confusing for anyone looking to just jump in for the first time. Or in the case of one of my friends, he watched episodes 1 through 6 as a kid, but has lost track of all of the new content that has come out in the last few years, and as a result, he's missing out on conversations we have at the office about The Mandalorian and all the other things coming out. So this video is for anyone who wants to jump into Star Wars but doesn't know how. So if you're new to Star Wars and want more content like this, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'm working on growing this community to 25,000 subscribers, and I'd love for you to be a part of that. Okay, so I'm going to do this video in 2 parts. If you want a quick answer as to what you should watch to jump into Star Wars, I'll list out the order you should watch everything first. But if you want to understand a little bit more, I'll do that in depth next. So here's a bullet point list of what you should watch in order to dive into Star Wars. And first up, all 9 major Star Wars saga movies. So that's episodes 1 through 9, starting with Phantom Menace, ending with Rise of Skywalker. The second is the spin-off movies, and that includes Rogue One and Solo. After that, you have The Mandalorian. This is the live-action show that I think is the most critical to watch and understand the overall story of Star Wars. After that, you have additional live-action shows, so The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Andor. After that, we finally have the animated shows, and those, to me, are one of the most important contributions to the Star Wars story, but I get that it's not for everyone. So let's start with the essentials and how they work in the Star Wars timeline. Like I said, first you need to start with the Skywalker saga films, and maybe more specifically, let's start with the 6 films by George Lucas. So there are the original trilogy, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and then the prequel trilogy, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. The prequel trilogy tracks Anakin Skywalker's transformation into Darth Vader and the rise of the Empire, and these movies take place about 20 years before the original trilogy, which is a bit confusing because the original trilogy was released so long ago, and now the prequel trilogy, which happens before, was released more recently. And that's why Star Wars gets a little confusing, because new content and new shows and movies are not always released in chronological order. They're jumping around the timeline to tell you the story. So, first point, watch the prequel trilogy. That's chronologically where it all starts, and then go to the original trilogy, and then that brings us to the sequel trilogy, which takes place about 30 years after Return of the Jedi. The sequel trilogy includes episodes 7, 8, and 9, or The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, respectively. These movies introduce new characters, and they do something to wrap up the story of the legacy characters you watched in the original 6 movies. This trilogy takes place 30 years after Return of the Jedi, and it only covers about a year of the timeline. It all happens pretty quick. So now you've watched all major Star Wars saga films. You know the overall story, but now it's time to fill in some gaps and introduce you to some new characters. My next suggestion is to watch the additional spin-off movies. That's Rogue One and Solo. Rogue One is the more important one here, and it tells the story of how the rebels acquired the Death Star plans right before Episode 4, A New Hope. Like literally, one of the last shots of Rogue One takes you into A New Hope. Now, you can also watch the Solo movie, but for me, it's kind of just a spin-off movie that gives you some more backstory to characters like Lando Calrissian and Han Solo and Chewbacca, but it's not essential to the overall Star Wars story. Now, this is where Star Wars gets a bit muddy. After you've watched the 11 movies, that's a big task on its own, you start to dive into the shows, both live action and animated. I'll make a quick note for the sake of this video. I love the animated shows, and I would say that they are pretty essential, but I get that animated shows are not for everyone, so we're gonna start with the live action ones. That brings me to what you need to be watching directly after you watch the main films, and that is The Mandalorian. This show takes place 5 years after the Return of the Jedi, which is episode 6, and it deals with the aftermath of the Galactic Civil War, which that's the conflict between the Empire, stormtroopers, and rebels, Luke Skywalker. The Mandalorian is still a show in progress though, so its overall contribution to the Star Wars story is still in progress, but for now, it's introducing new characters, revisiting old characters, and explaining where some characters were during the main movies because some of them were maybe left out. It's also laying the groundwork for new stories set between episode 6 and episode 7. Remember, that's a 30-year gap. And from here, you can start filling in the gaps by watching the other live action series that Disney has produced. First, there's the Book of Boba Fett. In my opinion, this is the weakest of all the live action shows, but it does have a couple episodes that are important to setting up season 3 of The Mandalorian, which is the most current season of The Mandalorian. The next two shows are Andor and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Both take place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi gives a glimpse into what Obi-Wan has been up to during his exile on Tatooine while he watched over Luke Skywalker. To be exact, it takes place 10 years after Revenge of the Sith. Andor is a spin-off of a spin-off. Again, Star Wars can be confusing, but it's a spin-off or more of a prequel to Rogue One. Remember, that's the one that shows how the rebels got the Death Star plans and ultimately how they blew up the Death Star. But this show focuses on Cassian Andor, one of the main characters in Rogue One. But it also gives a glimpse into the politics of the Empire during its early days of formation. Once you've watched all of those movies and live action shows, you'll be able to understand the overall story of Star Wars, and you'll probably be familiar with most of the key characters. But like I said, the animated stuff is amazing, and I would say it's essential. And that's definitely your next step if you're looking to jump into even more Star Wars content. Despite being animated, these shows really do hold the same feel of the live action stuff, and that is that Star Wars is for everyone. Whether it's kids or adults, there's something for everyone. Let's start with the Clone Wars. It covers the major conflict between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. It also introduces you to Anakin's Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. She's a character that is becoming more and more essential to the Star Wars story, and she's probably even one of the most popular characters in Star Wars right now. She's even getting her own live action show in August of 2023, which is coming up, and that will be a critical series in the Star Wars story. Now, chronologically, The Bad Batch is next. This show is relatively new and covers a unique squad of clone troopers, but it also gives a good picture of the early days of the Empire shortly after the Jedi were wiped out, and it's also bringing some closure to the story of the clone troopers, which they're the ones that throughout the prequel trilogies served the Galactic Republic and ultimately turned on the Jedi. This show, like The Mandalorian, is still in progress, but it's going to be wrapping up in 2024 with its third season. So after The Bad Batch, you have one of my personal favorites of all time, and that is Rebels. This is an amazing show every time I rewatch it. You should definitely watch it because The Mandalorian and Ahsoka are continuing plot lines that began in this show, which takes place a couple years before A New Hope. Oh, and there's a show called Resistance. To be honest, I didn't finish it, but it does take place during the sequel trilogy, I think. So there you have it. That's my basic guide for jumping into Star Wars for the first time, or perhaps after a long break from Star Wars. If you found this quick guide helpful, leave a like for the video and subscribe for more. I'll provide you with content to help guide your journey in a galaxy far, far away. Have a great rest of your day, and may the Force be with you.